Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again, and welcome to The Roads Not Taken, episode 13. It is November 12th, 2023. The Roads Not Taken is a weekly series we do on this channel where we go over the previous week's events, stuff that was underreported, unreported, or stuff that maybe got coverage, but it's definitely something you don't want to miss because it's going to be context for later. Stuff that wound up on the cutting room floor, so on and so forth. And then at the end, we go over some questions from y'all. If you want to send in a question, it is question4bo, F-O-R, Bo, at Gmail. Okay, so we will start off with foreign policy. This will put a lot of Gen Z, give them a little bit of a reduction in anxiety because this was a big question. The U.S. and Chinese presidents will be meeting ahead of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, something like that. Meeting ahead of a major summit to work on establishing and renewing communications between the militaries of the two countries. Those who are experiencing the whole anxiety that comes along with nuclear weapons for the first time. This is part of it. We talked about it when the questions came in. They're doing it. They are establishing those lines of communication. It's worth noting the U.S. and the Chinese militaries, they've had lines of communication about this to de-escalate things. They've kind of been turned off since that whole thing with the balloon. But they'll be bringing them back and probably establishing one at a higher level, would be my guess. Okay. A poll on November 3rd found that 76% of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign. Blinken and the U.S. have been advising Israel against a reoccupation of Gaza. That advice seems to be being ignored, for lack of another word. Netanyahu, once again, declined a ceasefire. He also reiterated that vague notion that Israel will somehow retain security control after the conflict. Talking to people who are somewhat familiar with his thinking, more so than I am, they think that may mean just like perimeter control, which I don't know that that's what it is, because that was kind of in place before. That doesn't seem like something that he would need to clarify. Moving on to another conflict, Russia is reportedly having to take air defenses away from protecting Russia's national borders to shore up air defenses in areas that they have currently occupied within Ukraine. Obviously, that will open the door for other events. If you are pulling away stuff that realistically should be just reserves, stuff that is integral to the air defense of your country, to fight an elective war, you are losing. It's really that simple. Okay, moving on to the U.S. So at this point, at time of filming, there's no real progress on a budget deal. Republicans still can't set aside Twitter likes for the good of their country or even their party. It's really not going anywhere. There was a rough sketch that came out from the Republican side. It is extreme to not to put too fine a point on it. I don't think the Biden administration or the Senate's going to go for it. Trump's team is requesting that his federal D.C. trial be televised. It is worth noting that the court rules don't actually allow for that, but He appears to be asking for it and supporting this idea in an attempt to manufacture yet another grievance for his base to be distracted by. Rudy is now advertising vitamins on his show. It's as bad a situation as you think from that. Republicans are still trying to find the right messaging to sell stripping away the rights of women across the country. They just can't seem to find the right phrasing to convince women to gracefully accept their place as second-class citizens. There is a serious conversation in the Republican Party right now about how to reframe their stance on reproductive rights, and people are looking to the way Nikki Haley has been talking about it to give you an idea of where the conversation's at. Meanwhile, Democrats are doing everything they can to get reproductive rights on ballots everywhere. They wanted an issue in 2024 that people are voting on directly. And yes, it's because it supports their party platform, but also because it is very obvious that that issue drives voter turnout. If they show up to vote for reproductive rights as an issue, they will probably vote for candidates who support reproductive rights. So it's not entirely selfless. In cultural news, the Pope has dismissed a very conservative U.S. bishop. And then in related events to that, this is the same bishop that is reported to basically have dared the Pope to fire him back in 2020. It seems like the Pope might have taken him up on that dare. And then in more papal news, trans Catholics can now be baptized in some instances. The Catholic Church, such a weird sentence to say, the Catholic Church is becoming more and more accepting in major ways when it comes to allowing certain rites to be performed. And we've talked about this on the main channel a few times. For a lot of people, especially in the United States, this isn't huge. For people where the Catholic Church makes up the social fabric of the country, this is huge. Like, this is life-changing in some ways. In environmental news, there are 2 reports that were published recently, and they have different ways of illustrating the same thing. One is basically saying, hey, you just lived through the hottest year in the last 125,000 years. The other is saying this is going to be the hottest year in recorded history. You have lived through the hottest summer of your life so far. Oddities. Researchers have apparently determined that a starfish, their arms are actually part of their head. And in fact, basically a starfish is nothing but a giant head. Short version. Okay, moving on to the Q&A. And if you haven't seen one of these before, I have not seen these questions before right now. Okay, settle a debate in our family. We all watch you, and this has become a topic of conversation. My husband says your closing line on the Roads Not Taken episodes references a cartoon, and my daughter says it references a poem. Who's right? The answer is yes. I like things that have multiple meanings. Here's some more information, and having the right information will make all the difference. Sure. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe. That's the cartoon. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about. There is also a poem by Robert Frost. And, the name of this channel is, The Roads with Bo. These are the roads not taken. Very similar to the idea of, a road less traveled. And when two paths diverged, he took the road less traveled, and it made all the difference. So they're both right. The closing line was definitely influenced by both of those. So, okay. Bo, a serious question. What can American citizens do to make any effect or change to what is going on? This is not a gotcha. And whoever put this here has put no context to that whatsoever. But the answer is the same. It doesn't matter what particular issue you're talking about. What can American citizens do to make any effect or change? Organize. Organize. Community networks. That is the building block of systemic change. It has to start at the bottom. And that's... I wish we had more time on the main channel to go over that. There's a playlist that goes over community networking in different ways, everything from fundraising to how to structure it. I mean, we even have a book coming out on that. That's where it's going to have to start. With the machinery that is in place in this country to maintain the status quo, if you want systemic change, you have to build your own machinery. You have to build your own networks. So I don't know, specifically what that question was about, but the answer is organize. The answer is pretty much always organize. Okay. In some of your videos, you talk about Garrick from DS9, and I was wondering if you'd expand on why he's your favorite Star Trek character. Okay. So, for those who are not familiar with the series, Garrick was a bad guy, for a lack of a better term, in the series. He was on the wrong side. And he was a spy. As time went on, he was a tailor, and just a simple tailor. But, he might prefer peace, but he didn't forget how to be violent. The reason I like that character is because, A, I like when something good comes from something bad. And B, he's a very real character. I mean, you would know it from looking at him, but there aren't a whole lot of people who are all good or all bad. And a lot of times, many people who are doing good are doing so because they used to do bad. The character and the ethical questions that get addressed, I find them interesting, especially in a series that, it provides a lot of social commentary, but it's normally pretty black and white. And Garrick is gray in a whole lot of ways, and the real world is gray. I said that thing, Garrick did nothing wrong, talking about that one famous episode where he definitely stepped outside the lines of what is normally acceptable in that world, in the Star Trek world. If you boil down what he said at the end, you saved this many lives and you did this horrible thing. It makes a series that often has... The series has conflict in it. It has wars. But the wars are always, good guys and bad guys. Very well defined. In real life, they're not. And his character really helped illustrate that. Why don't Palestinian forces release the captives to get a ceasefire? They don't seem to be offering them any protection, meaning having the captives isn't protecting them. Yeah. That has to do with the leadership. And, people are they're going to extremes to differentiate between the forces and the Palestinians, which is good. There probably also needs to be a distinction made between the leadership of the forces and everybody else. For the leadership, many of whom are somewhere very safe, what is happening there is in their plan. The strategy that's being used, the videos on this channel with the whiteboard, the strategy that is being used requires an overreaction. It requires all of the bad things that are happening to happen. That doesn't mean that Palestinians want it. We are talking about the leadership. We are talking about the top 10 people. The strategy that they're deploying requires that because it generates the outrage, which creates recruitment and potentially might bring another state actor in on their side. The leadership doesn't want a ceasefire any more than Netanyahu does. They both think victory is right around the corner, and they're both wrong. And I want to be super clear so this doesn't get taken out of context. This is about the leadership of these organizations. They don't want a ceasefire either. The Palestinian people, the people who are paying the price, the people who aren't in a palace in another country, they definitely want one. But the leadership doesn't. Because the outrage that is being generated around the world helps them. It's good for them. So that probably has a whole lot to do with it. They're not motivated to actually get a ceasefire. Not the people who make the calls. Okay. Note, this is in context of Gaza. Are there any other viable options? If not, tell us why we should vote for Biden, aside from the very obvious potential 45 disaster. I know that this is surprising. I don't tell people how to vote. I really don't, and I don't endorse politicians. The only politician I've ever endorsed was Big Bird. The only actual endorsement I've ever made was Big Bird running against Ted Cruz. I don't do that. Yeah, I mean, if you are weighing it between Biden and the alternative from the Republican Party, even in context of Gaza, Biden's better. Okay? Are there any other viable options? At this point in time, it would depend on what you mean by viable. There are a couple of chains of events that could put other people on the Democratic ticket, but I don't know that any of those are likely. You have a number of people that are kind of waiting in the wings that haven't really said that they're interested. You have Marianne Williamson. You have a number of people who, if the right set of dominoes fell, they could be in that position. Now, if you are talking about a third-party candidate actually winning, incredibly unlikely, almost impossible, and I have videos on that. Even if they win, they're starting at the wrong side. That's the top. The president doesn't actually get to set the legislation. So if you have a third-party president, but the Republicans and Democrats still control the House and the Senate, they can't really do much. This is why when you organize, you have to organize at the bottom, and you have to work your way up. Maybe you can send a message, but with the current risks of Trump being there as the alternative, I don't know that it's the appropriate time to send a message. Now, that being said, there are a lot of things that might take Trump off the Republican ticket. And all of that changes. We're still a year out. There's a whole lot of variables. So I would not determine who you are going to vote for a year before you're going to be asked to do it. Okay. Should politicians change their mind? If they don't change their mind, despite losing on an issue, they're labeled as not learning their lesson. If they change their mind, they're unprincipled. You'll say politicians take their stances to get and stay in power. I mean, yeah, but I don't think that fits them all. No, it doesn't. You have some people that are ideologues across the board. You have some people who are true believers in one particular cause. And, most of those people, they won't change their mind and they won't change the subject, Generally speaking, the way a representative democracy should function in theory, the politician's mind doesn't matter. What they believe doesn't matter. They should vote in accordance with the people that they're representing and what they want them to do. We are so accustomed to having rulers that we don't really acknowledge that the representatives are really just supposed to be a proxy vote. So, should politicians change their mind? Everybody should change their mind. When you're presented with new evidence, new information, you should change your mind. If it directly conflicts with what you currently believe. But that's not just a politician thing, that's a human thing. People don't like admitting they were wrong. So, politically, it depends on the issue. As an example, the Republican Party, they can change their stance on a budget item right now. No big deal. Their stance on reproductive rights that they have stood behind for half a century, they're going to have to slowly walk away from that. And that's why they're spending so much time trying to repackage it, because they know they can't just let it go, which is the smart thing politically. So they're trying to slowly move away from it now that the dog has caught the car. But most politicians are people who are interested in power. And they do take the positions they take to get and stay in power. There are exceptions to that, sure. There are exceptions to everything. The way them changing their mind or not changing their mind, the way it gets framed, you're looking at how their political opposition frames it. If you are a true believer in something, I mean, my advice would be don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. But there's the real issue here is thinking that a politician's personal opinion should matter. When you're talking about a representative, it really shouldn't. The representative should enact the will of the people in their district. They really shouldn't have to make a lot of decisions. The people in their district should make those decisions for them. Now, when you get to the executive branch, it's a little bit different because you need, ideally, somebody in the presidency, they would have certain qualifications. But generally speaking, in the modern era, they don't. So, I mean, we're not even looking for the right qualifications there. So, I mean, to answer the only real question that's in this, should politicians change their mind? Yeah. But they're no more likely to do it than the average person. In fact, they're probably less likely to do it because they will be attacked for, flip-flopping or whatever. In fact, when you have a politician who changes their stance, it is normally big news because it doesn't happen that often. So, okay, that looks like it. Those are all the questions. So, I hope that helps provide a little bit of context, a little bit of information, and having the right information will make all the difference. Y'all have a good night.